The vaunted demigods of humanity are some of the most important characters in all of Warhammer 40k. Their fraternity is sundered by the fires of Horus's ambition. The first time demigod blood was spilt. Yet this is a lie. For long before, two of the Emperor's sons failed, and so far did they fall that their very memory was erased. Yet what reason could cause such a thing to happen? What in this galaxy could do such a thing? In truth, nothing. For the hands that drove the second and 11th sons into purgatory were not of this mortal coil. They were once of the divine, now turned towards the infernal. For who else can lay low a demigod but a god? So join me today as we learn the truth about the lost and the forgotten, the missing 2nd and 11th Primarchs. Alright, so before we can get to the theory proper, first we need to lay out everything we know about the lost Primarchs. First off, their names, or the titles they were given instead of their names. The most common that we have is quite simply the Lost and the Forgotten, and that is generally speaking the one that is most commonly used, both in-universe and out-of-universe. But there is another name that's used that is very, very important, that being the Forgotten and the Purged. Now this is very important, as we know for a fact the 2nd and 11th Primarchs were very different, not only in how they acted, but also in what happened to them. Because we know that they fell for separate reasons. They did not turn away willingly, and it was a sorrowful and regrettable event in both cases. But they were different. Hence we can infer that when they are talking about the Lost and the Forgotten, or the Forgotten and the Purged, it's not a cohesive title, but rather one title for each, i.e. one was lost, one was forgotten, or one was forgotten and one was purged. And again, this is not something that happened like the heresy, where the traitors were spoken of with vitriolic hatred and contempt. This is something that is completely different, as the only time it's spoken with anger is to hide it. The first example we have comes from the novel A Thousand Suns. "Brother," said Magnus, ignoring Mortarion's words, "a great day, is it not? 9 sons of the Emperor gathered in a world together. Such a thing has not happened since."
"I know well when it was, Magnus, and the Emperor forbade us to speak of it again,"
said Mortarion, his voice robust and resolute in contrast to his pallid features.
"Do you disobey that command?"
And secondly, we have Fear to Tread.
"You know the reason. I will not be responsible for the erasure of the Blood Angels from Imperial history. I will not have a 3rd empty plinth beneath the roof of the Hegemon as my legion's only memorial."
Two very different examples, but both convey the same meaning. In the first, Magnus and Mortarion are discussing it, and immediately, Mortarion shuts down Magnus without a second thought. The Emperor told them not to speak of it, and apparently whatever censure it has will incur great wrath. So Morty, being the dutiful chump that he is, decides he's not going to have any of that. Whereas Magnus, someone who's always willing to push the bounds of curiosity, always edges that little bit more than he should. Second example is a bit more blunt but still carries the same effect. It's Sanguinius talking about the bloodthirst. He does not want his legion to become like the other two. He will not have a 3rd empty plinth beneath the roof of the Hegemon. That referring to the monument of the 20 statues of the 20 Primarchs of the 20 legions, which would eventually be changed to 18. But we'll get to that a little later. But as I said, it's spoken with anger only to hide it. Otherwise, it's often spoken with sadness, as a regrettable event that shouldn't have happened, that could have been avoided, and something that wasn't entirely their fault. And we see time and time again, when the Primarchs mention their other brothers, it's never with hatred or spite. It's nothing like a loyalist Primarch talking about a traitor Primarch. Another example we have is taken from the novel Unremembered Empire. When Rabute creates Imperium Secundus, he then adds 21 seats, each one for a Primarch, and of course a seat for the Emperor. The line comments on like, "Hey, 2 of those dudes aren't coming back, what's your story?" And Rabute replies as such, "Yet their absence must be marked. Places must be left for them. That is simply honor." Again, when the Primarchs speak about this, they're very saddened. They don't hate these guys. And that's very important, because we can infer that whatever happened to them, it wasn't their fault. This wasn't them choosing to be evil. This wasn't them choosing something bad. Therefore, it wasn't something like the heresy, in which it was considered a betrayal. This was a tragedy of the most epic proportions. A tragedy that should not have happened. And a tragedy that all the Primarchs mourn. But a perfect example of someone being angry and sad about this all at the same time comes from the Lost Council.
My brothers and I have come to put an end to this madness, once and for all. The history of the Imperium is not something that can be amended. We will not allow it.
Pacing around now the other men and women in the chamber, Alpharius nodded in agreement. We know the price of destiny, Lord Regent. We know the sacrifices that must be made. There was always a chance that some of us would not live to see the galaxy united beneath our father's banner. He saluted with one fist to his chest, being sure to mark the Sigilite's reaction to the outdated gesture. But to deny that they ever existed? To openly dishonor the member of our fallen brother? What gives you the right to decide that in secret, behind closed doors? Malcador glared at him. Do not speak to me of secrets. You are playing a dangerous game, the three of you. And my patience grows thin. Then, to a chorus of poorly stifled gasps, the Sigilite turned his back on Horus. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room upon him as he retrieved his eagle-topped staff from its cradle beside the throne, and steeled himself to face down the monsters he'd helped create. He lowered himself back into the seat and peered out beneath the hood of his cowl. While our great emperor is absent from the throne world, I carry his authority, and I act in his name. We here, we lords and ladies of Terra, have given the matter adequate deliberation, and have decided that a tribute to the fallen and disgraced Primarch is not a monument worthy of the investiary. The statue will be removed, the marble pulverized, and used to line the parts of the statue gardens of the inner palace. Even the Khan stiffened to that. Horus stood absolutely motionless, save for the twitching of his fingers. Doubtless, he was imagining all the ways he might tear the Sigilite limb from limb.
Not worthy,
he growled. Malcador leaned against the throne's carven back. If you cannot see the reasoning behind this decision, then you only convince me further that it is the right one, and that there is nothing more to discuss. Pray, return to your allegiance. The Imperium needs victories more than ever. Let these past failures lie. Quite unexpectedly, Horus laughed, loud and long.
You can't even say it, can you? You can't even say his name,
he said incredulously.
Do not speak it,
Malcador thundered, loading the words with psychic force that struck the Primarch's mind like a hammer to the forehead. Horus reeled, blinking away the pain. His brothers too seemed to hear the blow, along with every mortal in the chamber. Even the Sigilite's own ears rang, but he kept his voice firm and unwavering. This is your father's command, boy, and you all agreed to it. To disobey it now is to break faith with the Emperor himself. The Primarch gave a wry, defying grin.
My brother's name was...
Faster than human thought, Malcador's empty hand snapped up into an arcane gesture, long forgotten by any living soul on Terra.
Silence!
Horus froze. His limbs locked fast within his armor. He shuddered uncontrollably, pressure building in his muscles as he fought against it. Slowly Malcador stood, holding the Primarch in place with the power of his mind, and nothing more. The Khan sprang forward towards the center of the room. Lord Regent, he urged, holding out his open hands. You must release him, please. He speaks from grief, and the shame we all share. The air between them thumped with invisible energy. Malcador could still see the hateful, defiant pride shining through in Horus's pallid gaze.
You are not ready for the future you crave. None of you are.
He forced Horus down onto his knees. The stricken Primarch choked. The Sigilite's face twisted into a vengeful rictus. He felt the old, familiar rage beginning to stir, deep in his undying soul.
Enough. You will be silent, or I will unmake you here and now.
Horus's windpipe closed with a sickly crackle. His right eye bloomed red as a blood vessel burst in the sclera. But he would not relent. So defiant. So ungrateful. Alpharius took an uncertain step back. Stop, Lord Regent! Stop! You will kill him! Tiny, crawling motes of light began to creep in the edges of Malcador's vision. He could feel the heat building within his ancient bones, stinging at the meat of his flesh. The stench of burning hair rose in his nostrils. Sigilite! Bellowed the Khan, and in an instant, it was over. Malcador released Horus. The Primarch crashed to the tiled floor, convulsing, almost gagging on lungfuls of air. Alpharius rushed to his aid. urging his brother to breathe. So from this script, we can take two very important things that are basically fact at this point. One, basically all the Primarchs feel the same way about what happened to the other two. It's sad. They want them to be remembered, they want them to be honored. They do not look back on them with any type of hatred or malice or anything. And the very idea that Malcador would want to remove them would drive them to action. And some would argue, sow the seeds of the heresy. The second point, Malcador is very, very, very angry at this. But if you read into this a little bit more, he's not angry at Horus specifically, but rather he's quoted as saying he felt the old hatred rise anew. That hatred is referring to the situation of the 2nd and the 11th. Whatever happened with the 2nd and the 11th is something that Malcador himself personally hates. The hatred that he feels is about what happened to them. And here we see a stark contrast between the two. The Primarchs are mournful and grief-stricken. They miss what happened to their brothers. Malcador, however, being their uncle, he sees the bigger picture. He doesn't see the loss of two brothers. He sees what they could represent. He sees what that loss would have done. Meaning that whatever that loss was, it was something that threatened to unveil the very idea of Imperium. And that is what Malcador was upset about. Also, it's important to note, there was only one legion that was going to be removed here, as Horus is quoted in saying 19, meaning that initially only one was supposed to be removed, and this legion was the 2nd. Well, how do we know this? Well, we know from the official Warhammer 40k timeline, yes, that's a thing, that the 2nd Primarch was part of the first 5 to be found, most believing that he was the 3rd, right after Leman Russ. He's also said to partake in some of the oldest battles, including some of the most dangerous, meaning that he would have had a long and storied career, and thus Horus in particular would feel very close to him. And in regards to the 11th, he was part of the last 5 to be found. There are some claiming that he was the 19th, but this is a very iffy, because officially Omegon is said to be the last Primarch, but then some claim that Corvus Corax was the 20th of the last Primarch to be found, so it's a little iffy on that end. But at the end of the day, the 2nd was part of the first 5, the 11th was part of the last 5. But the next thing I want to focus on is the language used to describe them. The language that is used to describe them is fallen, failed. But specifically, it's not said destroyed. That's something that is never used. Even 30,000 years later, Bobby G still says the same thing in Dark Imperium. I was one of 20. 2 failed. Half the rest turned on my father. The Emperor is not infallible, nor am I. The blasphemy was intended to provoke the priest. A cheap tactic. Matthew was thankfully unmoved. 20? The priest arched an eyebrow. Yes, said Gilliman. Not 18. 9 holy Primarchs, 9 fallen devils. That is what the scriptures say. No, 20. Your church is ignorant of many things, as most people weren't aware that Horus and his followers had been loyal once, and that his 2 veiled siblings were not known in the 41st millennium was hardly surprising. More information deliberately hidden, more myths. But interestingly enough, this is not the only thing that we have about the lost Primarchs from Dark Imperium, as Colin Ferrier says something very interesting to Gilliman. The warriors were not at fault. The science is not at fault. The Primarchs were. Chapters from your gene lineage has also fallen in the past millennium, Lord Regent, and we do not censor them. From here, we can draw 2 key points. Firstly, the 2nd and the 11th did not die. They were not destroyed. They were not eradicated. At least in a total sense. More specifically, they failed. They were fallen. They faltered. Something happened that shouldn't have. It left them alive, but unable to be involved in the Imperium as other Primarchs were meant to be. Secondly, we know that it was just the Primarchs. Not only does Colin Ferrier mention that it was just the Primarchs, we have it directly from the horse's mouth. As when the Imperial Fists are preparing for the Siege of Terra, they will discover these supposed tombs, or memorials, to the 2nd and the 11th, taken from Chamber at the End of Memory. I knew them. Dawn took another step towards the doors, silently reaching for the deep memories of the 2 brothers. None of the Primarchs could say that they had breathed the same air as the lost sons, but Dawn was one of the few. He had been with them, if only for a while. Have you ever wondered why none speak of them? The Sigillite replied. Of course there is the censure over all who know of the lost, never to openly talk of their existence. Still, in the absence of the fact, all men will speculate. But you do not. The Primarchs never speak of their lost kinsmen in anything but the vaguest of terms. Have you ever wondered why that is? As you said, we were forbidden to do so, even when you were beyond your father's sight. Even when no one would be aware of such a discussion. Ask yourself, why your thoughts always slip over the recall of the lost and end up passing by. Malcador bowed his head. What were they called, Rogan? The Sigilite almost seemed sorrowful as he asked him, Your vanished brethren, tell me their names and titles. Dorn tried to grasp with vague recollection, tried to frame the questions that gnawed at him, but the more his perfect idyllic recall failed him, he could only see phantoms of the moments, holding on to them like he was trying to capture smoke between his fingers. Their names were, his mighty voice faltered, his brow creased in frustration. They were. To his horror, Dorn realized that he didn't know. The awareness was there. He could almost see the shape of the knowledge out on the far horizon of his thoughts, but it retreated from his every effort to see it clearly. Each time he attempted to frame a memory of the lost, it was like fighting a tidal wave. Everything else is clear, but there are ghosts in his mind. The Imperial Fist was experiencing an impossibility. Every known instant of his life was open to him, as if they were pages of a great book, but not these moments. Something has been done to me. The beginnings of a new fury built in his chest, boiling at the realization of such an affront. You are behind this, Dorn whirled, drawing his chain blade in a glittering arc of lethal metal, bringing it to aim at Malcador's wizened, cloak-wreathed form. You shrouded my memories. You invaded my mind. For that, I should cut you down. The Sigilite showed no reaction to the threat. Not just yours, Guilliman's, and the others who met them. It is extremely difficult to extract a reminiscence, even in an ordinary man. In a brain as complex and perfectly engineered as that of a Primarch, the task becomes Herculean. Imagine a tree in the earth, rising from a web of roots. How will one remove that without disturbing a single atom of the soil? A memory cannot be cut and patched like a mnemonic spool. It exists as a holographic thing, in multiple dimensions, but it can be adjusted. My father allowed that. He did not stop you. Stop me? The Primarch's eyes narrowed. Malcador slowly moved back, out of the ornate sword's killing arc. The loss of the 2nd and 11th was such a wound upon us, and it threatened the ideals at the heart of the Great Crusade. It would have ruined all that we had built in the drive to reunite humanity and drive off our enemies. Steps had to be taken. The legionaries they left behind, leaderless and forsaken as they were too great a resource to be discarded out of hand. They did not share the same fate as their fathers. You and Robute argued in their favor, but you do not recall it. It fell to me to see that they were attuned to new circumstances. You robbed them of their memories. I granted them a mercy, a second chance. What mercy is there in a lie? Ask yourself. The Sigilite aimed the burning head of his staff in the Primarch's direction. You wish to know the truth, Rogel. It is this. What I shrouded in you was done by your command. You told me to do it. You and Robute convened of some scheme and granted me permission. I would never countenance such a thing. Untrue! Malcador slammed the base of his staff onto the floor, the crash of the metal punctuating the word. Such was the fate of the lost, that you willingly allowed it to make safe that knowledge. Another denial formed in Dorn's throat, but he held it there. He put aside his anger and looked upon the possibility with detachment. With a cold eye of the Praetorian, would I have done such a thing? If the matter were grave enough, would I have been so pragmatic, so bloodless in my command? Dorn instinctively knew the answer. There was no doubt that he would. If the Imperium was put at risk, he would give his life for it. The cost of some memories, of a fraction of his honor, was indeed a price he would pay. Malcador approached him, leaving his staff where he stood. One bony, long-fingered hand emerged from the voluminous sleeves of his monastic robes. and the sigillite reached up to hold it before Dorn's face. Faint sparks of eldritch light glistened there. I will show you. For this instant, I will let you remember, and you will know why. The loss must remain a mystery. Dorn closed his eyes, and a glacial fire erupted behind them. Deep within him, a shadow briefly dissipated, sealing the breath from his throat. There was still much that the Psyker had said and done with the Imperial Fist that he did not accept. Although Malcador had professed that he had been truthful with him, Dorn had doubts that would never ebb. But not in this matter. In this, he was certain. The lost were gone. It was very well that they were. The grand misfortunes that befell them crumbled in Dorn's mind, but they left behind certainty. What came to pass could overshadow everything. Dorn knew that now. The raw, hateful truth is clear to me. If they were here with us now, this war would have already been lost. Again, from this we can glean two very important things. One, whatever happened to the lost Primarchs was something so incredibly, terribly bad that even someone like Rogel Dorn, the definition of a brick shithouse of a mind, the same guy who told a demon to fuck off by simply mentioning his duty, he could not handle such knowledge. This was something that even he could not withstand. This was something that would destroy the Imperium altogether. This is something that was worse than the heresy. Whatever happened to those two was something that could not be remembered. It was something that shouldn't even have happened. But then that begs the question, what on earth could it have been? Whilst we don't know for certain, we do have some hints. Most notably when it came to the second. The second was one of the longest acting Primarchs period. Thus he accrued quite a bit of glory, not only in accomplishments but also campaigns, taken from Fabius Vile, Clone Lord. Fulgrim made mention of it once. Apparently one of the two Forgotten Ones was said to have led an expedition to its Black Heart in the early centuries of the Great Crusade. Though why he was out this far, and what might he have found, was never recorded. Probably for the best. He frowned. The galaxy has devils enough, without letting out whatever resides there. So we know this speaks about the second Primarch, because it says early in the Great Crusade. And as we've already established, the second was in the first batch to be found. And this specifically is referring to the myth Monolith, aka Necron stuff. But this wasn't the only terrible threat that the second Primarch faced, as it's believed that him, together with Lemurus and the Lion, were part of the Rangdan Xenocides. The Rangdan Xenocides were three separate wars, well, one initial war, one absolute devastating war, and third just an eradication operation, to destroy the Rangdan, a wicked type of Xenos that was said to possess the ability to mind control by the use of psychic manipulations. People, aliens, machines, everything. They were terribly evil. Also, fun fact, these guys are the reason why the Imperium has a kill on sight for some Xenos. The Horus Heresy books describe it as such, facing waves of attack from the galactic north and east, and suffering losses that could not be exceeded until the dark days of the Heresy. The wars of the Rangdan Xenocides were the most terrible of any fought yet. Whole expeditionary fleets were sent to their death without a single survivor. Worlds were laid to waste. Dozens of Titan legions were obliterated. And by the end, entire Space Marine legions lost to the Imperium. Now most people think this means that, oh, the Rangdan just killed one of the legions, and the idea that a Primarch could die via Xenos, that was the big thing. It's a little iffy. Especially when you consider that the idea that a Primarch dying was also recorded, and I think that a Primarch being converted to heresy and betraying the Imperium is a lot worse than a Primarch simply being killed in service of the Imperium. At least then he could be a martyr. Rather, I think this refers to Space Marine Legion's worth. We know for a fact that the Dark Angels lost approximately 50,000 Space Marines. Even if we assume that the Space Wolves and the Second Legion both lost half of that number, that means that a grand total of 100,000 Space Marines would be lost. The actual smallest Space Marine Legion is about 80,000, but we do know that a Space Marine Legion is considered to be at least a few 10,000. Combine that together, saying that entire Space Marine Legion's worth of Space Marines lost starts to make a bit more sense. Another thing that we can infer about the second is as well taken from Fulgrim's own mouth. He calls the second Primarch competitive, hypocritical, and quiet. Now, of course, this is Fulgrim narrating, so take this with a grain of salt. But judging from all this, he really does seem kind of like a lion-type character, an old Primarch, someone who's been through the ringer, no nonsense. Exactly as someone the Emperor would send to fight someone like Rangda. But what about the 11th Primarch? The 11th Primarch is described as being young and still of innocence. Now, what exactly that means? Well, we don't really know. Again, context is required in everything. But when you consider that he was one of the last to be found, and we know for a fact that he was found before Corvus, and everything that happened with them happened before Corvus as well. We know this as a conversation with the Emperor and Corvus was taken from Deliverance Lost. Brothers? Corvus was excited by the prospect, pushing aside the questions that the Emperor answered had prompted. Though he had made many friends amongst the prisoners of Lacheus, Corvus had always been aware of his otherness, and when they had started to call him savior, any hope of normal relation had ended. That there were others like him filled Corvus with hope again. "Yes, you have brothers," said the Emperor, smiling at his son's delight. 17 of them. You are the Primarchs, my finest creations." 17? Corvus asked, confused. "I remember that I was number 19. How can that be so?" The Emperor's expression grew bleak, filled with a deep sorrow. He looked away as he replied. "The other two," he said. "That is a conversation for another day." Now, admittedly, we don't know much about the 11th, but if we take a look at the Horus Heresy books, we do get kind of a little bit of a hint about what might be in relation to them. From Horus Heresy Book 3, it discusses the creation of the Alpha Legion. However, most notably, we have more redacted in that passage. Redacted, we can assume, refers to the Lost Primarchs. One initially suggests about a failed legion, one that was created from some source of a potentially tainted population. There was a lot of that on Terra at the time. The idea behind it is that the Emperor tried to make them a success, but well, that Primarch couldn't really work, so they were a weird type of failed experiment sort of thing. Thus, they didn't pass the Proto-Legion stage, or the Alpha Induction stage, hence where the Alpha Legion get their name from, or at least it's theorized. This is when a legion grows from a few hundred to approximately between 1 to 3,000, usually 2,000. From there, they expand into a full formal legion of tens of thousands. What we really want to look at here is the idea of potentially tainted population. We know that this wasn't the second, because the second was already out and about. And when it comes to proto-legions and issues with legions being created and them becoming bigger, you notice that legions being found in the latter half often have the same issue. The Alpha Legion being the most notable, but Corvus and his boys were never the biggest legion, or even close to being the biggest. Magnus another perfect example. So when we consider that the 11th son was found in a lost batch of 5, it makes sense that he would fit this marker. But we have another hint to the 11th Primarch, one that if true, is far more macabre and terrible than any other. And that comes from Codex Adeptus Astartes, 9th edition to be correct. There it talks about the Shadow Vaults, and all the various evil nonsense that is held underneath Terra, and they mention everything from terrible artifacts or relics of the Dark Age to literal demons, but then they mention something unique. When they talk about dangerous creatures and people, they mention something by the name of Subject 11, specifically as one of the most dangerous things in the vaults, kept under lock and key by the Shadow Wardens. For those of you who don't know, the Vaults of Terra are things that hold men of iron that can eat suns and literal demons, in some cases greater demons. So whatever Subject 11 is, it is somewhere in that realm of threat. Now this fact will become very important when we get to the theory a little later. But from here, we can draw 5 different conclusions. Conclusion number 1, one of them had to be destroyed. The other was lost to them, but they're not dead. At least not in a total sense, and they're not exactly out of the reach of the Imperium or the Primarchs. Now while this may sound a little presumptuous, it's something that's heavily hinted to, taken from the Lightning Tower. Horus has 3 of his brother legions with him. You have your fists and 13 others. Would that it would 15, mused Dorn. Do not even think it, my friend, warned Malcador. They are lost to us forever. I know, said Dorn. Now this is really interesting because this isn't something that you say about somebody who's dead. This is something you say about someone who might as well be dead though. Again, whilst anything about the 2nd and the 11th is going to be hazy, this is something that it feels a little too specific just to be a coincidence. Conclusion number 2. They did not betray the Emperor. They failed. They were fallen. In some way, shape or form, something happened to them. But it was not their intention to betray the Emperor, nor was it their intention to do so. Whatever happened to them, they were not part of it. And the Primarchs specifically missed them. So much so that the idea of them being removed is seen an affront to them. They want their brothers to be remembered. Conclusion number 3. The second was the first to be found, and he fought in the Rangdan Wars and encountered the Necrons, specifically the Yemenith monolith. The 11th, however, was one of the last, and was not as experienced in war life, and because of this, his legion potentially had issues growing to a certain number, and probably had issues of recruitment due to a tainted population. Fourth, the issue that happened was with the Primarchs specifically, not their legions, not the gear, and that they were then spread across the legions, again with Dorn and Rebute asking for it. Whilst thanks to the First Heretic many believe that the Ultramarines got the lion's share of the legions, it's plausible, but I think it's much more a case if they were distributed evenly, with the Ultramarines getting a little extra but not exactly so much more. And finally, conclusion number 5. Whatever it was deemed a threat to the Imperium greater than Horus, and it was so bad that even Dorn, the embodiment of defiance, could not handle it. So, what happened to them? And this is where we come to the theory. As we know from our Primarchs video, we came to the conclusion that the Primarchs are base of some type of warp entity, that the souls, the power that the Emperor used to create them, has its power in the warp, and that warp is based on some deity of humanity. This was confirmed with Sanguinius and the Angels of Gold and Black, with Leman Russ and the Gods of Fenris, and with Corvus Corax and the Grim Reaper of Vengeance. But at the end of that video, I posed a question. What if those gods rebelled? And this is what I believe happened to the 2nd and the 11th Primarchs. Their gods within them manifested. The Primarchs were created to be containers for the souls of these gods, both souls combined into one. But for the 2nd and the 11th, their gods denied this. Their gods would not be contained by the Lightning Lord. They wanted their godhood, and they would kill anyone, even their hosts, to get it back. But how could this have happened? First, the 2nd Primarch. We know that he fought with the Rangda. We also know that he met with the Necrons. Both of these heavily involve psychic abilities. And as we know, the Primarchs are of the warp, meaning that if anything was going to alter them, it would be the warp. But it's specifically the combination of Necron and Rangdon that we need to look at. The Necrons work with Black Stone, that is the ability to nullify magic abilities. It's defensive against psychic powers. Meaning that if a Primarch could encounter Black Stone, any type of psychic wards, any type of psychic materials that the Emperor would have placed on him to prevent the soul from being active would have been weakened. And we know for a fact, Primarchs are not immune to Necron corruption, Ferrus Manus being a prime example, as we covered in a previous video, but that's only a part of it. The Rangdan were able to control people via psychic means. So we have one instance of a Xenos weakening psychic power. We have another instance of a Xenos controlling via psychic means. What I believe happened is this. The 2nd Primarch would encounter something from the Necrons, something cursed, something that would weaken his soul ties to his god. He would then encounter the Rangdan, who when attempting to mind control him, would not mind control him, but rather they would be the final straw that broke the bonds of his god, unleashing it. Thus, the god would be unleashed, and hell retribution had to be paid. He would have to be purged. This would then require the Lion and Leman Russ to fight him and defeat him. The Lion and Leman Russ are 2 legions who have 2 unique characteristics that make them perfect for this role. 1, they are incredibly loyal to the Emperor, loyal to a fault, some would say. 2, both of them have some ability to counteract psychic abilities. The 1st Legion with an innate ability to resist them, and the 6th have a unique connection with it, with them showing a unique ability to be able to kill psychics better than most legions. And this would explain how Leman Russ got the title the Emperor's Executioner. Because think about it, this was something that the Emperor wanted to keep hidden, but you had to explain what happened. As I mentioned before, the Leman Russ is someone you send when you want to send a message. The Lion is someone you send when you want something to be destroyed, utterly. Most of the 1st Legion stuff, hidden as is. I can totally see the Lion and Leman having to put down their fellow brother. I can then see the Emperor trying to make this into about the Rangdan, saying that Leman Russ is the Emperor's executioner, because he's the one who killed the Rangda. The Lion would not throw a hissy fit about this. He would simply nod and let Lehman take all the glory. Lehman then would be known as the Emperor's executioner when it came to Xenos, but in reality, it was just a ploy to cover up the fact that a guard had gotten loose, and they'd have to kill the mortal coil of one of their brothers. Again, it would explain how remorseful Lehman is when he talks about fighting other Primarchs. It fits in both with characters of the 6th and the 1st. But what about the guard? Well, as we know from the Catan, you can't exactly kill a guard, but you can control it. You can banish it. That'll then explain the conversation between Malcador and Dorn, and how technically he still maybe might be there, or at least a little glimpse of his soul might be there. But while the truth is that he might still be there, getting him to help or getting him back is impossible. But what about the 11th? The 11th also fought the Rangdan. It's believed so. The Lost Legion specifically are said to have fought them. So it's very much plausible the same thing could have happened, but something different. The Rangdan attempted to corrupt him by psychic means. His god also would react adversely, but because he was missing the Necron influence of the 2nd, instead of him being separated, it would then cause the Primarch to go mad. His soul would be ruptured, split in twain. Such pain and terror unimaginable would cause his mind to fracture, and he would turn into naught but a beast. Unable to be recovered, yet unwilling to kill him, the Emperor would order his custodians to lock him as Subject 11, place him in the vaults below Terra. Thus would he forever be lost to his brothers and the Imperium. It would explain Subject 11, it would explain why he's called the Lost, and it would explain why so much emphasis is placed on the 2nd, but not the 11th. Because the fate of the 2nd could have been avoided, but the fate of the 11th is far more tragic. And in some terrible messed up case, he is still technically there more than the 2nd, but it's cold comfort. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my theory of what happened to the 2nd and the 11th Primarchs. Now, here's only the point where I muse about how maybe GW will reveal this in a later date, maybe they'll drop more hints, but I think it's time to address the custodian in the room here. The 2nd and the 11th Primarchs will never be discovered. We'll never know the secret, we'll never know the hint. There's a reason why there are so many things that hint at them, but they're also different and odd in their own way. And that's because they're a relic. They're a remnant of an age long ago. When GW first created the idea of Warhammer 40k, it was niche. It was beyond niche. These were just some lads in Britain who decided that they were going to make something funny. So, they made the Legions. Even when 2nd edition came, the 2nd and the 11th were still just there. And that's because the truth of it is that while some people think that the 2nd and the 11th were made to be their own unique legion, hey, make your own legion, fan-made stuff, that is partly true, but in reality, the 2nd and the 11th were just a general stop for anything. What happened here? Oh, blame it on the 2nd and the 11th. What happened over there? Blame it on the 2nd and the 11th. They're a scapegoat. Because back then, 40k was just 40k. It's only in the past decade that 40k has truly begun to become mainstream, that GW have really started to be a massive company. Thus, the 2nd and the 11th are just holdovers from when they were a small company meant to have fun. Any lore bullshit that doesn't make any sense? 2nd and the 11th. And the 2nd and 11th aren't the only one that was like this, but they're one of the very few, if not the only thing that remains of that. So, thus is their fate. Lost and forgotten in universe, and seemingly out of universe. But this isn't something to be mourned. Rather, I think it's a nice example of, hey, we can do some nice theory crafting, but at the end of the day, they are a relic of 40k. Both in universe and out of universe. And I think it's nice to smile as to what they were, rather than muse on about what they should have been. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for watching. I do love y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know down below what you guys think about my theory, what do you guys think about the 2nd and 11th, and what do you guys think about their place in 40k. Love to hear more of it. But I say a massive thank you guys for watching, but even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Massive shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Curtis Studies, Mr. AB3, and Miss Majora of the Void. Massive shout out to the good old NCOs of the Sergeants, with Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Mooresmith.Fireheart, Mr. Sean IRL7, Mr. Bolwin, and Mr. Matthew Merrill. Big shout out to my corporal tier members, with Mr. Tremeo the Math Kitty, Mr. Lord Rosarius, Miss Shauna Smithers, Mr. Tech Priest Toaster, Mr. Gentle Salamander, Mr. Rambling Hamster, and the Wench of Warhammer. And finally, but certainly not least, the awesome privateer, with Mr. Thomas Oslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Michael Aeda, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. CMD Neo, Mr. Fortress Unum, Mr. Dalmaric, Eric Massaro, and Mr. Weaselhack. I love you. I appreciate y'all. You're amazing. Sign up today with the memberships to get a bunch of awesome benefits, early access videos, behind the scenes stuff, member only exclusive content, and you get to help out this channel and help your boy put out some amazing content. But remember, this will always be free, and whether you give your boy $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah. But before I go today, I just want to say massive thank you for all the love and support. Recent videos have been popping off, the channel is doing fantastic, and I owe this all to you, so I just want to say I love you. I appreciate you. If you guys just watch every video, it means the world. It really means a lot, so I love y'all. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Rebellion 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all make sure to say hello out there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers! By the way, for all y'all talking about Malibron, Dutch explained the whole thing in his video. I'm not going to repeat it. Go and watch his video. It's good. Quality content. Okay, bye.